The Hillman Imp, one of the most consequential cars of the 20th century. The car that was so close yet so far, born to rival the Mini and lead Roots Group into a new era of growth, but it would sadly not reach its full potential. Catastrophic issues would plague the Imp during its life, finding itself entangled in a world of issues both internal and external. From the politics of Linwood and management woes, to the disastrous strikes that crippled its maker, the Imp, in reality, never stood a chance. Roots' new small car for the 20th century, no matter how good or bad, had everything stacked against it. These are the events that led to the Hillman Imp we all know of today, and why it might not be as bad as the Brit-bashing echo chambers would have you believe. This is the truth behind the Hillman Imp. Hello everybody and welcome to this video. If you're not subscribed already, please make sure to do so. It really does help me out and you get to see more of this. More history videos, more cars and conversions uncovered, and more projects. This video is on the ill-fated Hillman Imp and how it ended up the way it did. Do you have any Hillman or Roots Group memories? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to like the video if you liked it and share if you want other people to see it. But without further delay, let's get into the truth about the Hillman Imp. To understand the Imp, we need to look at the background of how it came to be. Back in the 1950s, the Roots Group was a vast empire, covering everything from manufacture of cars to sale. They really had a stranglehold on every part of their process. And with heavy hitter marks like Hillman, Humber and Sunbeam, the group was on a course for success. Its cars like the legendary Super Snipe and of course the phenomenal Minx were killing it in the medium to large car sector. Plants like Ryton were churning these cars out at a reliable rate as well. This would lead Roots to rival BMC at the time as Britain's largest car manufacturer. But there was something on the horizon that would shake Roots and many other car manufacturers to their core. In 1956, the Suez Crisis, triggered by the nationalisation of the Suez Canal by the then Egyptian president, would lead to a strangulation of oil supply. Fuel rationing would follow, and with the cars of the day mostly being 1.4 litres and above, Britain's road users would come to a screeching halt. But there were some manufacturers that had bet at the bottom. Cars like the Morris Minor, Austin A30 and Ford Anglia had started to see an uptick in sales before this, but now it was a stratospheric rise. The sub 1.2 litre category was surging in popularity. Roots were now suffering in the sales department and needed to come up with something and fast to plug this gaping hole in their lineup. If they didn't do something, someone else would. And with BMC already on their path to the Mini, the race to the bottom was on. Roots had already been experimenting with a small car back in 1955 with limited resources and success. Michael Parks and Tim Fry were tasked with getting this completely clean sheet project off the ground, but now with a sense of urgency. This car was needed to stem the bleeding. The car's brief was simple. It had to have 4 key attributes. Accommodation for 2 adults and 2 children, performance of at least 60 miles per hour top speed, fun to drive, and economy of 60 miles per gallon. The final requirement was at odds with what we all know today, and what BMC were coming up with as well at the time, but perfectly in tune. The car needed to be like the Fiat 500 and VW Beetle, rear-engined. The first car, the Stage 1 Slug, was a 2-cylinder rear-engined economy car with questionable looks. When presented to management, they were so unimpressed, they vowed they would never let the Roots name be compromised by selling a product designed for austerity. The Slug, though, was ahead of its time. With its 2-cylinder engine and genius packaging, it paved the way for the next car. The board's hesitance would be silenced, however, with the A30 exploding in sales. The fuel-starved masses needed their economy cars. Project Apex would be created in 1956 with the completion of the Stage 2 Slug prototype. But there was a big problem for the small car: the engine. Roots, known for its medium and large cars, couldn't exactly crowbar a 3-litre overhead valve engine into the new car. Their 1.4 litre unit in the new Audax Minx was far too big as well. They needed to look elsewhere. This led to Roots approaching a local engine manufacturer, Coventry Climax. who had just the engine for the job, the FWMA all-aluminium race engine. For the new Roots economy car, lightness was also key, and this aluminium engine was a perfect fit with a few modifications. The car's powertrain was progressing well. The gearbox would also be made out of aluminium, with synchromesh on all 4 gears, with its 3rd and 4th gear set high to improve economy on a cruise. It seemed they had got everything right. Its entire engine and transmission would weigh just over 79 kilograms, perfect for an economy car. Meanwhile, while the Imp was flying, the Roots group were being pushed down on by the government of the day. Expansion was key for it to survive, and with that came the need for additional production capacity. Roots set about finding a location for their new factory in their heartland of Coventry. It made sense. All their infrastructure was there. The Midlands was the hub of car manufacturing in the UK, so it was the logical choice. After all, the supply chain for the Imp was there as well. If kept in the same area, the Imp could be built fast and cheap, increasing the already slim margins. But in a departure from logic and sense, the government decided that Roots, a company based largely out of Ryton, would need to build their new plant for their most crucial car 154 miles away in Linwood, Scotland. The rationale behind this for the government was simple. There wasn't enough work in that area, so bring the work to the people. This would be the first stumbling point for the Imp, one of many on the road to disaster, but that was fine. Taxpayer money would be loaned to Roots to facilitate this new plant. As the 60s drew near, the factory to make the Imp, thanks to the back and forth, hadn't even started being built. This is where the Imp would come off the rails. The project would be accelerated to warp speed. Key aspects of the car that needed to be honed and fully tested would only see partial testing. The famously dodgy pneumatic throttle, automatic choke and the cooling system were all neglected. This was met with internal apprehension, but management needed to get the Imp to market. Amidst all of this turmoil, there was a positive. The car had visited Bob Sayward in the styling department and was looking absolutely fantastic. With inspiration being drawn from the Chevrolet Corvair, the Imp went upmarket enough to hold the Roots name, but was cheap enough to be the everyman car it needed to be. At around this time in 1959, BMC's car of the century would be launched. A car that quite literally turned the world on its head and its drivetrain by around 180 degrees. That car was ADO 15, the Mini. It was a marvel, as was the Imp, but it went in the complete opposite direction, with its transverse front-mounted A-Series engine and front-wheel drive. The Imp was the complete opposite. Its Coventry Climax engine, rear-mounted north-south, and its rear-wheel drive, it was the conventional at the time, in reverse. The market would decide who the winner was, but first the Imp, still in development, would need to get there. At the time though, Roots' Imp getting to market was the least of its concerns, when in February 1960, British steel light pressings went on strike. This would kick off because a shift couldn't be swapped for a honeymoon. This would cause 132 workers to walk out in protest, leaving 4,600 in Coventry to be laid off. And now it wasn't just the Imp that couldn't make it to market, it was everything. Roots' sales slumped, and as the strike wore on, the loss of production would cause two main issues. Quality control and of course delays, both would haunt a once upmarket name, placing marques like Hillman and Humber in disrepute with the car-buying public. The big six British motor manufacturers had just witnessed their biggest shock yet. 31,000 people across the Midlands would be idle due to the strike action, and there being simply no components to make the cars their livelihoods depended on. As a result, temporary layoffs would be made, a self-propelling cycle of disdain. In August of that same year, Roots were stockpiling car bodies in response to the turmoil of the previous strikes. As a result, workers would strike again, as they feared being laid off. This strike would last 13 weeks. As the strikes wore on, home market sales slumped, meaning there was no demand for production, no work for the workers, no sales for the company, and no money in the coffers. There were losses all round. Meanwhile, the Imp's pre-production models were out testing. Its first European test would take place in 1961. The next year, in 1962, it would be taken to Canada for its first cold climate test, and later on to Kenya for its first hot climate test. As the Imp was going global, Roots was going to the wall. 1962 would be a turning point, a turn for the worst. Roots were losing money, the Imp was being accelerated to the point of overspeed, the Mini was on the up, and the industrial base was in turmoil. The perfect storm to collapse one of the greatest car makers this country has ever known. There was also another problem for the Imp, Linwood. It was behind schedule and was presenting another problem, logistics. With the Imp's engines being produced in Coventry and Linwood lacking the machining equipment, a supply route was needed to send the engine components up there by train in large batches, costing money and time, both aspects that were crucial in an economy car. The Imp wasn't on target for its launch date. Thanks to the cutbacks in development caused by the strikes and the cash squeeze, Roots' £2 million loss, everything was in question, but with the factory in Linwood due to be opened by the Duke of Edinburgh on the 2nd of May 1963, the company couldn't afford any additional setbacks that would lead to further embarrassment. Roots were now on shaky ground, and the Imp, with key features like the pneumatic throttle and cooling system not tested as thoroughly as needed, it was declared ready for launch. These decisions would haunt the Imp in later life. It wasn't just the Imp that was getting the button pushed too early either. The Linwood plant was the same. With its royal unveiling by the world's most experienced plaque unveiler incoming, Roots needed to pull a fast one. The factory in many areas was covered with sheeting to mask the unfinished areas. An intentional choreographed route was followed by Prince Philip, known to veer off course at all times, ushered into the finished areas. The Imp was launched the next day. The designers had achieved what they set out to do in spite of the troubles of the past and the rush to the market. Some remarked it wasn't quite up to the task of commercially fighting the Mini. As long as it could achieve the volume needed to ramp up, it could be a success. And with that, Roots' small car and Linwood were open for business. Sort of. The remaining parts of the factory would be finished over the rest of that year. Farcical, I know, but Roots really did have their back against the wall. You may be thinking now it would all go well. But there was another problem. With its relatively green workforce and management sent up from Ryton to oversee the first years of the plant, industrial relations were horrible. The management didn't understand the challenges the workers of the Clyde faced as newbies in some cases to the noisy and fast world of modern production. As a result, Imps would leave the factory in varying states, and with the drive for volume, their workers were not happy. Meanwhile, rail strikers would also impact the delivery of engines. Strikes at Linwood itself would cripple production. The fragmented workers and fragile supply chain was one thing. Public perception was another. As an alternative to the Mini, the public enjoyed the car. After all, the Mini was facing its own problems. They just didn't enjoy the quality. The Imp and its pneumatic throttle would often leak, resulting in an absolute firestorm of public resentment. And to think their taxpayer money had been lent to the company. As fortunes changed at Linwood for the better, with the heat of the industrial unrest cooling off, the situation for the wider Roots group was at breaking point. Lord William Roots, one of the founding brothers, would initiate talks with Chrysler for a joint venture, but sadly he would not see it to completion with his death in October of 1964. By 1967, Roots were going to the wall. Chrysler would take over that year, but would shock the world in 1968 by reducing prices of Imps by 4%, despite the inflation infecting the UK at the time. This was another last-ditch attempt to push the Imp for volume. It seemed yet another management blunder was to befall the Imp, but the entire UK car industry was on a steep downward plunge into the abyss. And as the 70s began, Longbridge, Linwood and Speke, along with many others, would see some of the worst strikes this country has ever experienced. By 1976, Roots' small car dreams were over. The Imp would be canned by Chrysler, and in 1981, the very plant created for it would be closed down. The Imp has unfortunately been wrongly named a failure. It was just another victim of circumstance. A car delayed, mismanaged, politicised, self-sabotaged and rushed in development and production would never see the success needed to keep the top-heavy Roots group afloat. It was a miracle the Imp existed in the first place, but thanks to the people that made it, through all the challenges, it still managed to make a dent. The Hillman Imp and its derivatives were some of the most legendary cars of the 20th century. First and last cars for some, the be-all and end-all for Roots. The Imp, despite its flaws, like many British cars of the era, derided by some but applauded by many, as the little car that tried. And that is the end of the video. What is your opinion on Roots and the Hillman Imp? Let me know in the comments below, but as always, thank you for watching. Keep watching and remember to subscribe for more of this, and I'll see you in the next one.